Joe's been using no-till farming practices for over 40 years and running a cow-calf herd on his operation near Havana, North Dakota. He also uses cover crops and rotational grazing practices. They have always been important to him, and he was a founding board member and the first U.S. chairman of the Manitoba and North Dakota Zero-Till Farmers Association. He's also a founder and chairman of the Conservation Cropping Systems Project located in Foreman, North Dakota. Help me welcome Joe.
Thank you. What a great crowd. This kind of reminds me a little bit of the early days of the Manitoba North Dakota Zero-Till Association. We could fill rooms like this in the early 80s in Minot, North Dakota. And it was so fun to see the energy. You could feel the energy and the excitement of people wanting to come together, share ideas, learn about this thing called no-till farming, or in Canada, zero-till farming. So it's really fun. So who in here has heard the term, don't kick the can down the road? Okay. My daughter, who helped me put this presentation together, Olivia Stenvold, she was helping me put it together, and I said, I like this title, Don't Kick the Can Down the Road. She goes, Dad, nobody's going to know what that means. And I said, well, I still like it, so I'm going to use it. So something I hear a lot about farms now, talk about introduce your farm, where it's at and whatever, is putting it in context. So my farm is located right at the tip of the Katota Prairie. And it's quite a formation, as most of us in this room probably know. But I am it just noses into North Dakota. And then I am so blessed that my ancestors, they came across on a train in the 1800s, and they went across this low, fertile land with no landscape, no features, no rocks or water or anything. And Ole and Nils, they landed right there at the nose of the Coteau. There were plenty of rocks, lots of water, few trees, but I actually am blessed because I do have some features. I remember when I was going to college at North Dakota State University. No booze? No booze? Come on. Wait, no. Okay, let's put things in context. Have you ever heard the term eating crow, being humbled, having to eat your words? So somebody in our family actually attended South Dakota State University, and he's done really well. Has anybody ever heard of Dallas Goddard? Yeah? Yeah, he's our nephew. So we had to put on our bunny costumes more than once. So blessed again, blessed to have a family. So sometimes I think the soil health principles get overused, but they really do put it in perspective, and it kind of gave me something to put my slides in and talk about. So what is soil armor? I always called it residue management. It doesn't matter what you do on your farm. As a manager, you have to figure out what crops you're going to grow, what they're going to look like after you grow them, what they're going to look like after you harvest them. So soil armor and residue management to me are the same thing. So this is one of those pictures on my farm that if I'm feeling a little stressed out, all I got to do is get out my phone and look at this picture and go, oh, life is good, If my soil all looked like this picture, life would be good. And I'm really proud to say a lot of it does look like this. But this, in context, this particular shovel full of soil came off from a piece of ground that's been in perennial grass for most of its life and has only recently been farmed and hasn't been destroyed by us tilling the land. So what can we do to get soils, to keep soils looking like this? Not to get soils looking like this, but how do we keep them like this, and then how do we improve what we're farming? One thing is we have to keep soil armor on our land. And unfortunately, I have to say, this was my field. And it was after some low residue crops in sequence, combination with not getting the rain at the right time to get crop establishment. And at the head of that nose of that coteau, I mean, all the Dakotas are windy, but there are spots that are windier, and I live on one of those spots. Sometimes you can try to do residue management and Mother Nature messes with it, right? Farming is messy. So what do you do? How do you no-till something like that after the wind's blowing it around? And then if you do farm it, how do you get crops to come up when it's like that? So I always used to say for many, many years that residue management started with the combine. But really, I got thinking about it, it doesn't start with the combine. It starts with what you plant. And a good example is like that was spring wheat, this is rye. Residue management, how you handle that are two totally different things, even though they're both cereal grains. This, with my rye, I find I need to, okay, back up a little bit. I had cattle my whole career, so I would naturally save some straw for livestock, so this would have been straw that I saved. But I did get out of livestock when I found out nobody in my operation, in my circle of influence, wanted livestock when we moved on. So I sold my cows to my cousins, still have access to livestock, and they still need straw for their cattle. So we do. We bale off some straw, and I wouldn't recommend that to everybody in a no-till situation to sell your straw, but I do have access to manures, so I can quite easily replace it. Residue management, right? If you have a low residue crop, it's pretty easy to get the stuff spread out, but there's nothing left. There's another one of those pictures for me. This is corn in that same rotation. How I got to keep my corn so my corn doesn't blow around, keep the straw coarse, long, and then put some cover crops in between. This happens to be some pair row 60-inch corn. That's what I've been doing the last 6 years, and I love it. And think about turning a cow out there, huh? Wouldn't that be nice? So you can do everything right sometimes. Well, in your own mind, you can think you do everything right. And then the neighbor comes in with some type of speed disc, hits his corn stalks in the springtime, after you've planted your beans in your pair row 60-inch corn and your green growing cover crop, and 2/4 of his corn stalks blow off into your field and cover your field up by 10 inches of corn stalks. So farming is messy, so it doesn't always work the way you intend it. But most of the time it does. Here's another thing doesn't always work. So this was supposed to be planting green, but I'm not planting green, am I? There's very little green out there because my broadcast cover crop didn't work in that particular application. So, but I'm still no-tilling. I'm still getting through coarse residues. Hopefully the stuff doesn't blow around. And then you have to deal with, in a residue management situation, you have to deal with the residue that's left, right? Can you put it where you need it and not where you don't? Here's 2 rows of corn that, were probably high yield environment, And this is in July, and the temperature, I don't know if you can read that, temperature is about 60 degrees under those corn stalks. They're not only holding the water from evaporating in the middle of the summer, but they're keeping the weeds down. They work really good. And just the next row over is rye growing. So I have rye in the next row. Residue management. This is not my soybean field, but my cousin's. No-tilled in the corn stalks. On the yellow beans there that are turning, they baled off some of their corn stalks. And where the beans are yellow and more ripe is where they baled off. They got an earlier start. They were racing to the finish. The stuff they didn't bale off stayed green, caught another rain. There was 10 bushels difference between the stuff that was baled and the stuff that wasn't. So even residue management within a system can have effects on your end yield. In this particular case, it cost that farmer dearly to take those corn stalks off to feed his cows because he lost his soil armor. That soil warmed up, dried out, and cost him a lot of yield. Sometimes, again, farming's messy. We don't get a chance to plant a crop on some fields. Everybody's probably had a prevent plant field or two over the years. We're no different. Here, the field has been chemically, the weeds have been controlled chemically, and we're putting in a cover crop before winter because it's losing its soil armor. It was corn stalks, and they're disappearing real fast because we have a fairly active soil. Okay, so moving on to minimizing soil disturbance, or no-till, or some version of that. But the important part is actually minimizing soil disturbance. In 1979, after attending NDSU and listening to a Dr. Miller tell me in a soils class in 1977, spring of 77, he said, I just want to challenge you, and I know we have students in this room, and I always remember him making this statement. I want to challenge you producers, young producers in this room. There's a concept out there I heard of called no-till farming, and I want to challenge you to go research it. I don't know anything about it, he said, but I want you to go research it, find out what you can about it. It sounds like it would be good for soils, he said. Now, that was a soil scientist teaching a soils class at a college. I commend him. So this was later that summer. I asked my dad if I could modify his John Deere corn planter. I welded some international plow coulters on a John Deere corn planter. And next year I no-tilled my first corn crop. This, as far as I know, was the first commercial strip till machine. DMI gave us that toolbar because it was a side dress machine, so nothing was in the right place to strip till, right? Everything was 15 inches off. So with a magic of a cutting torch and a welder, we modified that machine to become a strip till unit, and then they put it into production and produced strip till units. This was in 1989. I did the very first national no-till conference in Indianapolis, and talked about strip till in 1992. But I got to say, it was a little more tillage than I wanted. So even though I strip tilled for a decade, I was always hoping I could get away from it somehow. Because I knew that the strip till gave us a little bump over straight no-till on my farm. It did. And it wasn't just the fertility, it was a little bit of a warming of the soil and a little bit earlier planting. So, this is maybe a good spot too. So, in that same time frame, we got wet. What happened in the 90s? For all of the upper Midwest, we got wet. We found out it could rain, and we found out it could rain a lot more than we ever imagined. So it was sometimes hard to even strip till just because we were too wet. So I wasn't even getting that job done. And a smart man, although very opinionated, told me one time at a conference, because I was complaining because our fields were too wet and all my neighbors had gone back to tillage. And I was like, I'm not wanting to give up, but I'm really wondering what I'm going to do with all this water. And he goes, young man, you might know who it was, Dwayne Beck. Heard that name? He said, young man, you need more plants in your system. And I'm thinking, all right, I got corn and soybeans, and I got flax, and I got wheat, winter wheat. How many plants can I put in my system, right? So he didn't say how. He didn't say exactly what to do. He just said, you need something using more water. So we started, that's what got us going down the road of cover crops. Okay, so after about 10 years of raising cover crops and realizing we could manage a lot of our water issues with cover crops and learning a ton about cover cropping, I thought, what happens if we put, and actually I was working with another gentleman my age, high school classmate of mine, that was our research manager at our farm in Foreman, North Dakota, on our research farm there. Actually, it was supposed to be, we can't call it a research farm because the funds we were using, we couldn't say research, we had to say a demonstration farm. So it was a demonstration farm. Well, anyway, he was demonstrating that if he put cover crops in rows, it was easier to come back next year with the machinery and plant corn on those rows. And we found that certain cover crops, the corn responded better. So we quit strip tilling those fields and we just started planting corn on those rows of cover crop, and we came up with this name, bio-strip till. And it's been working. I still use it today. This is a bio-strip till application after cereals and on 30-inch. That's when I was still on 30-inch row. And it worked. Just come back the next spring, plant your no-till your corn right into those. And that black strip is actually faba bean. And I learned about that talking to farmers. It was actually a Canadian farmer I was talking to that showed me a picture of cover crops. He wasn't doing this, but he just had a picture of cover crops on his farm. And I go, what's that dark plant? He goes, oh, that's a dead faba bean. I go, wow, that's kind of amazing. So I got some faba beans out of Canada and started planting them in rows and following it with corn, and it worked. So it's not always, like it's not cheap to strip till, right? That's a pretty aggressive field operation. Well, seeding a bunch of cover crops isn't inexpensive either. So you got to, call it out what it is. It's an expense to seed cover crops. Here I'm actually planting faba beans. They're so large I had to plant them with my planter, and I was using my air seeder to plant the rest of the cover crops. But the end result is basically that. And then the next spring, planting corn into those dark strips. And now I am on the pair row 60 corn on this slide. All right. Moving from that, now we're going into planting green, which has really turned my farming operation around. Here's a little video. And this actually was one time when broadcasting rye into standing corn worked. And here's the rye. I'm planting the soybeans green into the rye in between the corn stalks. And that's what it looked like a few weeks later after I sprayed it out. That field was one of my first times planting green, and it was one of my highest yielding soybean fields I ever had. It just flat out works. Now, I'm going to make this statement. I have not had planting green be detrimental to a yield. I've had it be instrumental to a yield, but not detrimental to a yield, unless I didn't get the crop up. So planting green on my farm, you need to get the crop planted generally before the cover crop has taken too much water. So whether it's corn or soybeans or whatever you're planting green, a crop into something green, you don't want it to seal too much moisture before you get crop establishment. But then once, like beans, for example, once they're growing, they don't care about that competition. I think they actually like it early. You need to get the competition backed off by the time they start to flower. That's when the yield will start going the other way. But with the rye, I mean, it's already done its thing, and you've got it sprayed out. Plant diversity. What is plant diversity? Crop rotation. So I'm going to talk about a crop rotation before we go into the kind of nuances of interjecting other things in there. And you'll see in these pictures there's other things going on, but we'll just talk about the rotation. So corn on my farm, followed by beans, followed by, on this particular case, it's a specialty crop. These are radish for seed. A couple cute grandkids. Oh, not such a cute guy standing in a rye field. And to enhance my harvesting crop rotation, I have done a few things like planting camelina and then relay interplanting soybeans into the camelina in the springtime, then harvesting the camelina off from the top of the soybeans, then harvesting the soybeans. And I've done that twice, and it basically works. I've done some polyculture, played around with it a number of ways. I struggle separating multiple crops, and I have invested quite heavily in cleaning equipment now. But unless you have livestock to feed that 10% or 20% that you can't separate and make it saleable, then you don't really probably want a polyculture. I'm just saying. You got to be able to utilize 100% of what you grow in some manner, and livestock would be one way to do it, but I don't have livestock myself anymore, so the screenings become a waste product on my farm. So now we're going into a little more detail about plant diversity. So let's go beyond crop rotation. Let's call it, this is what I call it, 365-day living roots. You could call it cover crops. Call it, whatever you want, but it's basically keeping a plant growing as much of the year as you possibly can. Some of the first stuff I did, I either planted into a cereal stubble or I hired an airplane to broadcast into corn. For the most part, it worked pretty well. Well, I shouldn't say that. That's not fair. For the most part, it was about a 50-50 gamble on Mother Nature to broadcast seed on my farm. And then I always had edges and headlands where you really wanted the cover crop. Usually the stands weren't very good because you've got more insects and predators and things like that coming in from the edges of the field, or the airplane is scared to broadcast that close to the edge, or one thing or another. So I did end up with inconsistency on my cover crops, and if there's one thing you really don't want, is like in any crop, you don't want inconsistencies. So even though it did work great at times, there were times it didn't. So we tried interplanting into 30-inch rows. NDSU actually purchased this machine from Amity, and it was a modified, what would you call it, interseeder, basically, that we did. And the crops, one thing about it, the consistency of the cover crops coming up were fantastic. So a lot of times they looked like this, looked beautiful, right? Coming up, you could put in multi-species and have them come up, look great. This was a broadcast field that actually worked. But what happened back here too many times is in August, when that cover crop had got established, but then in August when that corn canopied and it got hot, maybe a little dry, which it usually does in August, by early September, the cover crop had died in most cases, or got so thin that the next year it wasn't real meaningful. So that's what led me to other practices. And again, this is a case where it was broadcast and it worked. Little shot of soybeans get a bad rap a lot of times for soil structure, and I don't disagree with the argument. It is something to do with that legume structure that breaks down the aggregation in the soil, and your aggregates become a lot smaller. I don't have I'm not a microbiologist, and I don't have I don't get it. I don't know why it's doing it. But one thing that really helps, if you're planting those soybeans green, you can maintain that soil health and that soil structure throughout the season, and in the fall still have really nice soil structure behind soybeans. Ideally, I'd be broadcasting something on those soybeans at leaf drop and reestablishing a cover crop into those soybeans so it's green when I harvest and then green throughout the winter. But based on your rotation, you can't always. So this is kind of my toughest rotation, because I usually follow soybeans with a specialty crop. And I am starting to do it now, even if it's an annual, so it kills over winter. I'm going to start broadcasting more of my soybeans with a cover crop just to keep something green growing throughout the fall. So here is a system that really got me going on the 365 days, because I could not figure out how to consistently get cover crops to survive in my corn rotation. So when I went to the pair row 60-inch rows and I planted my covers, there you can see that I'm out there actually planting my covers in the corn. So I'm going to back up. I kind of have these video a little wrong. So that's what it looks like in the fall before winter. So okay. So here I'm planting it in the corn. There's what it looks like in between the corn. This actually worked out really, really neat. The first year I did this, I didn't have a plan for my fertility. So I was sort of broadcasting the fertilizer or placing it on top. I tried Y dropping, I tried broadcasting. I tried a few different things and I wasn't satisfied with my corn yields and thought I could do better. So what I do now with at the time that I'm actually planting the cover crop, it's really side dressing time for corn. So now I use that opportunity when I'm making a pass through the cornfield to place some 28% right along the corn row. So the openers that run alongside the corn row, I'm actually putting 28% down. And that really seemed to work. I'm not feeding the cover crop, but the cover crop gets just enough solar energy to stay alive. The other thing I've kind of learned, I've experimented a lot of different inside the crop cover crops, interseeded cover crops. And it depends on what you want to do with it. If you know you're going to graze it or chop it, heck, put anything in there you want, right? Because you're going to get some money out of it. But if you know that what you really want in the fall is bushels of corn, then put in something that's a little more conservative. So these are all cool season. This is oats, rye, flax and alfalfa. The alfalfa and the rye are the component that I really want in there because they're the ones that overwinter. So as we go on here, so this is harvest time. We've seen that photo. This is springtime. I've planted the soybeans, green. And my soybeans go in that strip that was fertilized for the corn. Basically, there's a little less cover and less corn residue, so the soybeans go there. In between is the covers, and then in between that's the corn. And I've had really good luck. It pretty much does take place of a pre-emergent residual product for soybeans. It's my pre. So it works pretty effective that way. And then when it's time to spray the rye out, then maybe a few weeds are starting to come, and then you just clean it up then. And then a lot of times it's almost clean the rest of the year. I'm not saying very often I don't spray it. Once in a while it just gets one application, but most of the time 2 more than takes care of it. Through that process of experimenting on timing of spraying out, and that's a discussion all in itself. That could be a whole program, is timing of spraying. And I don't know what to tell you other than in quite a few years and quite a few times I've tested it, I have never had leaving the rye go till it's headed out, about to flower or flowering. I have never had that at harvest time affect the yield detrimentally. Now in this picture, you can see the beans over here look a little fuller maybe, but maybe it's just the residue in there that makes them look a little different. But I think these beans look better. Combine didn't think so. So I'm thinking I'm going for maximum soil health building, and that would be by leaving the rye. Some crops to help this 365 thing. One thing that's, there's a few producers working with winter canola as a possibility, winter camelina. So your crop is your living cover crop, right? Here is where I planted cover crops into a cereal grain, and if it was a spring wheat, I include rye with it. If it was a rye, I don't need to include rye with it because I have volunteer. Then I just put other cover crops in there. And wow, sometimes you get some moisture. Your garden crop can be better than your harvested crop was. And well, I'll mention that down the line. There's another camelina growing in some soybean stubble. So this particular year, it was a little dry in August, and the corn suffered. So, I still had a good corn crop. Don't get me wrong. It was decent for the year I had. But it wasn't the 200 bushel I was looking for. It was like 150, okay? That's still a good corn crop. But it started raining kind of after the corn needed it, but look what the cover crops did. They just, boom, they came on and really looked good at harvest time. Talking about soils, my farm has a lot of difficult soils on it. Living at the foothills of the Coteau, we have a lot of salts, a lot of seep ground, and we all know that corn and soybeans don't handle tough soils very well. They just don't. So in my rotation, that's the 2 crops that don't do well those years. Well, having a cover crop that's able to grow throughout the growing season, because that cover crop is planted between the corn in early June, having that cover crop be able to grow in that corn, in between those corn rows, when the corn just, takes a deep dive into those sodic spots or salt spots, the cover crops a lot of times do okay through there. And then since there's an overwintering component in there, they survive the winter. Next spring, they come on. And I have actually I've actually kind of gotten ahead of some sodic spots and salt spots on the farm by having cover crops continue to grow. Okay, so one thing I have learned, and an expression I've used, is that can you make 1 + 1 = 3? Livestock integration into cover crops. That is a 1 + 1 = 3 every time. So, told you I don't have cows now. I did though, and I had cows for 15 years that I was cover cropping. And I had cows on those cover crops all the time. I thoroughly use those. Here's about the time I'd like to pull them off. When I still have soil armor, soil cover, this is those biostrip till fields. You can see the dark strip. The plant's mostly gone now. You know, the faba bean's gone. The other plants, the radishes, turnips, flax, there's some cereal stubble in here. There's still plenty of cover to protect the soil, but the cows do so good. You know, that little fatty right there probably weighs 750, 800 pounds. And at the whole time that this calf was getting fat, mama was gaining weight, and she was still milking. And that's awesome. That doesn't work on our pastures at this time of the year. We know that, right? They've gone dormant. Feed quality has gone down. And that's just a great way. Now, I would like to get to where I'm, instead of just letting a cow herd out in a whole, like 2/4 of cover crop, it'd be nice to kind of bring them along so they can graze them a little more efficiently. But honestly, I don't know how necessary it is. Okay, speaking of livestock integration, all right, how else can you go along with livestock integration? One way is if you have access to manures, I'd say use them. I mean, it's good for soil health. It's good fertility. So there's me, about the time the cows are leaving this field, I'm spreading some compost. And then we can talk about compost a little bit. I've had good fortune of having a 20,000 cow dairy 15 miles from my farm. And they do one thing really well. This was the manager telling me this. We do one thing really well. We produce a lot of shit. So, and they're willing to truck it up to me and other farms. So here I bought a 14-foot composter. It's called a Sittler out of Ontario. And I've been composting now for about 10 years, composting dairy manure. And that's what it looks like after about 5 or 6 turns in about 2 months. So they're usually bringing it to me this time of the year just because that's what works for them. And then I wait until middle of the summer when I have time to start composting. The first year I tried composting in the wintertime, and it stayed very wet. And actually the windrows were so wet yet in the spring. It composted, but I like them to dry out a little bit as they're composting. So by the time I get to this stage right here, I'm probably at about 45% moisture. They're done composting. I'm at about 25-30% of the bulk, and considerably less weight also because a lot of the water has left by that time. And it's ready for plant food. There's just another shot of loading up the spreader. And I'm out spreading some biostrip till. One thing we didn't talk about, we talked about livestock integration. And, all right, so you can have livestock on top of the land, but we all know that there's livestock under our feet. And feeding the livestock under our feet is more important in soil health than feeding the livestock above ground. And the way we feed the livestock under our feet is with plants. So that whole concept of keeping plants growing on your farm, it has one purpose, and that is to feed the biology in the soil. And if you can do that, we will start to mimic what Mother Nature started out with, and that is a really healthy, well-aggregated soil that has amazing porosity, the ability to take on water. This is a couple young technicians who happen to be friends of mine now also. Luke was doing a graduate study where he wanted to check the porosity of a no-till soil versus a conventional till soil. And he asked me if he could do a little experiment. I said, absolutely. He didn't even tell me what it was going to be. He just said, I got to experiment. So he had bought some liquid latex, little kit, and he carefully took the residue, kind of backed off. He explained to me what he did. Otherwise, I wasn't there when he was doing it. Put a ring down, poured this liquid latex in there, and then left. And about 10 days later came back, and we were out combining corn, and he comes up, drives up in a university vehicle, and he said, say, do you want to see what we just dug out? They spent like 4 hours digging the soil away from all of this latex that had run down into the earthworm channels. And look at that. So it isn't hard to imagine why water might go into that soil once you see that visual effect of that experiment. So that was kind of, even though I knew what my soil looked like, but I hadn't seen it inside out like that. That was kind of cool. Okay, I added a 6th to my 5 soil health principles, and I think it might be the most important one. Committed. Are you committed to, if you start down this venture, to make it work? Attitude and perseverance fit in that same category. So do scenes like this, make you kind of like want to crawl up in a ball and very uncomfortable? They should. They should. And if they don't, then, we need to become a little more educated on it. But if they do, then do something about it. Don't kick the can down the road any further. Do something on your farm. And it's not just soil, it's water quality, right? So in this picture, I love, when I first looked at this scene on my own farm, I was like, gosh, that's really interesting. You got clean water or clear water coming out of the tile line. You've got dirty water coming down a drainage ditch. Well, what do you get? The clash of two systems, right? You got surface water coming off from a black field, carrying sediment load, creating a dirty stream, and you've got water coming out of a tile line. Does it carry soil? No, that's been all filtered out. Does it carry nutrients? Sometimes it does. So stewardship gets back to that. Are you committed? Are you committed to try to, whether you have tile drainage or natural drainage, are you committed to keep that water as good quality as you possibly can? You get into this generational thing. I'm fortunate, as well as most of us in the room, to have generations of farmers. Dad and myself in about 1962. Myself and my son in about 1985. My son and his son in about 2008 or whatever, and it just keeps going on, and that's what's so beautiful about it. But that's what motivates me too. Keep that chain of connection going. Get your kids involved. Take them out early. People say, I tell people I don't garden because I don't have time, but I actually garden quite a few acres, honestly. No-till potatoes. That's fun. Throw some potatoes out of the ground, cover them up with straw. So, again, just be committed. Don't worry about what the neighbors say. Or if you are worried about it, which I can't say nobody can tell you you're not going to be concerned about it, what the neighbors say, banker says, but communicate with them, especially your lenders and your landlords. Lenders, landlords, neighbors, husbands, wives, fathers, communicate with them about what your plans are. Research it, go to town. But don't kick the can down the road. Here's a beautiful sight to me. When you look out and see this one green field in a sea of brown. So in that whole picture, where do you think soil health activity is at its peak? Right? Right there. Animals and green plants. And the rest of that is a dead desert with biology wanting something to eat, and they aren't getting it. Sometimes to be committed, you got to do things. Maybe you like to spend the winter making something in your shop, right? So if you can't buy it, work on making it. Have somebody make it for you. Use your imagination. Bring people to your farm. Here I'm getting ready for a tour at my farm on wide space corn. I'm not embarrassed by it. I make mistakes. I don't mind showing people. But I have a lot of successes too. Here I was single row 60 versus pair row 60. And I learned something myself from it. And the people that came, I think did too. Be prepared, just like anything. Be prepared. Have your equipment sitting at the end of the field ready to go. Bring people, experts, onto your farm. Ask them questions. Just keep digging in the soil. Here, I know I'm out of time, but here is a picture of green rows. This is the year it got wet during harvest time. Our neighbors were just wallowing through the mud in their cornfields, and we're driving on top of green. It's awesome. Okay, beautiful, beautiful to see green in the cornfield. I would be a horrible advertiser of my own adventure if I don't tell you just a really quick few notes. We have a family business on our farm. This is my family. I'm missing a foster son there in that picture. This is what we do. We built a lodge. Here's the lodge on a pasture on the nose of the Coteau, looking north out those windows. And we have events there, whatever people can dream up. Family reunions, business retreats, weddings, craftings. It's fun. Come visit. I'd love to have you come visit. I'll give you a farm tour. And that's generally where we're located, and we're not very far from population, but thank you very much.